Hello, and thank you for attending this information session on the Medium Density Housing Code. It's a significant amendment to the R Codes Volume 1 and includes medium density housing provisions. My name is Jenna Campbell. I'm a Senior Urban Designer here at the department, and here in the room with me is Blair Stroud, a Senior Planning Officer, and Matthew Talent, Senior Planning Officer. So we will take you through the policy process, key changes to policy provisions, implications for local planning frameworks and transitional arrangements that will apply once the policy is gazetted. Now, before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we're meeting, the Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation, and I wish to acknowledge and respect their continuing culture and the contribution that they make to the life of this city and to this region. So when the project first started, that problem definition phase was undertaken, and it was found that typical medium density development in the state was characterised by excessive site cover, and this included excessive site cover in both greenfield locations and infill locations. It was also characterised by a loss of vegetation and tree canopy, and this was really the removal of existing trees that occurred during the subdivision stage, both in greenfield and in infill, and trees not being replanted or replaced on development sites. So streetscape was often dominated by garages and crossovers, particularly in greenfield development where narrower lots had double car garages. There was impact on the functionality of internal layouts and room sizes, and we saw a lot of like really small bedrooms and small living areas that were really not very functional at all. There was a lack of housing diversity with predominantly 3-bedroom houses with 2 bathrooms and double car garages, and there was a lack of 1- and 2-bedroom housing available. There was insufficient daylighting, winter solar access and natural ventilation, and really just overall really poor quality outdoor spaces, often largely covered with patios, which impacted the daylighting and solar passive design performance of the dwellings. Which led to high household energy consumption. So really the policy seeks to counter these issues that we saw and deliver better quality medium density housing. The policy has the opportunity to provide more affordable and right-sized homes and providing more housing choice through incentives for 1- and 2-bedroom houses. It aims to deliver access to sunlight and improving comfort for users and occupants of the dwellings and providing better solar passive design outcomes through solar access requirements. It aims to reduce household running costs and have better access to gardens and open space within private lots themselves. So there's larger garden requirements as well, and garden and soft landscaping requirements. It also aims to provide better water infiltration and management of the heat island effect, and this is mainly through permeability and tree requirements. And it provides a more streamlined planning process, so really aiming to provide more clarity for assessors and proponents. So the policy overview, the policy is broken, so the R codes are broken into 2 volumes. There's volume 1 and volume 2. So volume 1 now consists of 5 parts, from part A through to part D and appendices. Part A is the operation of the code. Part B includes built form provisions for low density from R2 to R25 for single houses and group dwellings, and R10 to R25 for multiple dwellings. Part C is the new part to the code, and it applies to medium density built form provisions, and it applies in single houses and group dwellings in R30 plus and multiple dwellings R30 to R60. Part D is the land component, which includes provisions for site area and subdivision. The R Codes Volume 1 also has an additional document, the explanatory guidelines, which has now been updated to provide further clarity on medium density outcomes for designers and for local governments. And the R Codes Volume 2 now applies to R80 plus multiple dwellings and ROC coded land, and with just minor consequential mods following the policy review. So Part A, operation of the code, establishes the purpose, application and operation of the code and remains fairly unchanged in comparison to parts 1 and 4 of the existing R codes. So there is now an additional provision for local planning frameworks, which is seeking to modify the R codes. And there's a requirement they now need to be consistent with SPP 7 design of the built environment. The special transitional arrangements are also provided within Part A to assist with the transition to the new medium density provisions. And this includes information on special transition provisions specifically and arrangements for local planning frameworks, including structure plans and local development plans. And there's a greater emphasis on using explanatory guidelines in policy, particularly when undertaking a design principle pathway. So the current R codes remain applicable to low density coded lots at R25 and below in Part B of the R codes 2023. So there's been consequential modifications have been made to some provisions, mainly relating to changes in the definitions. And Table 1 has split the primary controls table, has been split with the primary controls relating to built forms such as open space, setbacks and OLA are still remaining with Part B low density. And then the minimum and average side area requirements have been moved into Part D land. And other metrics and provisions have remained unchanged from the R codes Volume 1 2021, so the previous version. And Part C, medium density, is split into 3 sections. Section 1 is the garden, and we've put this section first really because we wanted to prioritise the location and design of the garden in its ability to provide natural light, daylighting and natural ventilation into the dwelling. And Section 2, the building, includes elements relating to the dwelling. So we move internal to the dwelling and in trying to ensure better internal performance and occupant amenity. And Section 3, neighbourliness, relates to neighbourhood context, so the impact of the development on the neighbours. And these elements guide the design of development having regard to local streetscape, residential and community impact. And so Blair will take us through some of the key changes to Part C.
So the first element of the garden is private open space. In the R codes 2021, we do have outdoor living areas, so we've improved on this existing element. So with private open space, we have a minimum primary garden area. Previously, it was based on the R coding. We've now changed that to the site area. What we found was that we were getting sites coded at a higher density and they were getting reduced garden area sizes, but the dwelling was mainly a lot larger. So because of that, we've now switched it to the site area. So it doesn't matter on your doesn't matter about your density code. It's your site area that impacts the size of your garden. There is a minimum dimension of 3 metres, and then we also have the existing 2/3 without roof cover requirement. But we've also added in a requirement that where your site is below 161 square metres, you are not permitted to cover any portion of your primary garden area. So that's just making sure that you work with the primary living space and creating a better connection between those 2 elements. So as I said before, the intent of these changes were to get a more usable garden area appropriate to the dwelling size and improve access to daylight. Element 1.2, so trees and landscaping. So we've improved on element 5.3.2 landscaping of R codes 2021. So previously there was a requirement for 1 tree. We've improved this to 1 small tree. So the tree has to be a minimum of 3 metres high at maturity. And along with that, it needs to have a 9 square metre deep soil area. So that's really just to ensure that the tree grows. The deep soil area has a minimum dimension of 1.5 metres, and we also require, when your primary street setback is greater than 1.5 metres, we also require 1 small tree to be in that area too. We also have incentives for tree retention. So there's a requirement for if you retain a tree on site, then you get a site area concession for a multiple dwelling development, which we'll discuss later on in the slides. You can also reduce your landscaping when you retain a tree on site. So the intent of these changes were to improve the urban tree canopy through a great number of trees and also a larger size of tree per site. On the same element, we require 15% of the overall site to provide soft landscaping. So previously it was landscaping within the R Codes 2021. We've introduced a new definition of soft landscaping, so that has a minimum depth requirement in the definition. We also have a 1 metre dimension for soft landscaping. Under the new R Codes, the front setback area has had its landscaping requirement reduced from 50% to 30%. This has been done because overall the site has to have more landscaping than what the previous R Codes required. So the intent of these changes were to improve water infiltration, reduce the urban heat island effect, and improve the streetscapes. So the next section of the medium density code is the building. The first element of that is size and layout of dwellings. Under the R Codes 2021, it didn't really consider the indoor amenity of dwellings. So this is quite a new element to the R Codes. We did have the primary living space requirement in the 2021 R Code, so we have improved on that. So we provided a minimum dimension of 3.8 metres for the primary living space. So that's to ensure that we get a functional, I guess, primary space within the dwelling. That primary living space has to be have direct and physical access to the garden. So that's making sure that we have that good connection with the garden. We also have minimum dimensions for the bedroom, so that's 2.7 metres for the bedroom, and then we have a minimum 9 square metres for the floor area. Similar to the primary living space, we want to make sure that it can be furnished and it's a functional area. And for the bedrooms, really to make sure that you can fit a double bed in each bedroom. So as I said before, the intent of these changes were really just to improve the amenity of the indoor area and improve the functional use of these spaces. Element 2.2, so solar access and natural ventilation. So similar to the previous element, this is quite a new provision or element in the R Codes. We've introduced a minimum 1 openable external window for each habitable room. So this kind of complements the NCC. And then with the primary living space, we require a major opening to be oriented between northwest and east. And with that major opening in the primary living space, it needs to have an external uncovered area abutting it of a dimension of 3 metres by 3 metres. So this is to make sure that we get some good daylighting into the primary living space. And the 3 by 3 area also prevents, I guess, an alfresco from covering that good window and preventing daylighting into the primary living space. So the intent of these changes were really just to reduce household running costs by getting good daylighting in, improve occupant amenity, and I guess introduce passive solar principles into the R Codes. Next element is parking, everyone's favourite element of the R Codes. So we have introduced provisions that allow 0 parking bays. So this is where a dwelling has 2 bedrooms or less and is located in location A. You're permitted to provide 0 parking bays. We do have restrictions on the number of garages and carports you can have on your site. And this is really just to make sure that we're focusing on providing, I guess, room for the dwelling and the garden over the garage and carports. There's no restrictions on uncovered bays or basement parking. And then we do have some bicycle provisions for multiple dwellings. So yeah, as I said before, the intent of these changes are really just to focus on the people rather than parking. So provide more space, be it in your primary living space or in your garden. And also just to reduce the extent of covered parking on site. Where your bedroom does not satisfy the minimum dimension and area requirements, it will not contribute to your parking calculations. So I guess you have to think about providing the right number of bedrooms if you want to achieve a greater amount of garages or carports. So this is just an example of a house design under the medium density code. So on the left is a house designed under the R codes 2021, and on the right is a dwelling designed under the R codes 2023 during the design testing phase. So as you can see here, we've got the garden is located within the centre of the site, and that's providing a lot more daylighting to the whole dwelling. And then you've also got dual daylighting, so from the southern part of the primary living space and the northern part of the primary living space. We also have 2 trees on site, so you can see the trees are a lot larger than what the previous R codes required. And then also you can see with the boundary wall, walls, we've got dual boundary walls. So we've also got reduced setbacks, so you can see that the setbacks of the walls have been reduced down from 1 metre for a 1-storey dwelling.
Okay, so this element relates to element 5.5.2, age-independent persons dwelling. In part C of the new R codes, there is no longer an age-independent persons dwelling requirement. It's now called universal design. So there's gold level universal design requirements that are required to be eligible for a site concession. And there's also a 20% silver level universal design mandated for 10 or more grouped or multi-dwelling developments. So we've, compared to the age-independent persons dwelling, we've removed the over 55's occupancy restriction, as well as the minimum of 5 dwellings. And this is really just to allow greater uptake of universal design requirements, to allow more dwellings to provide more allowance for ageing in place and greater housing diversity. It also increases the stock of accessible homes and also provides for a more simplified assessment, where we've got in Appendix 4, there's universal design requirements for gold and silver level. So element 2.8 of part C, so ancillary dwellings, this is related to element 5.5.1 ancillary dwellings of the 2021 R code. We have increased the dwelling types that permitted, ancillary dwellings are permitted, so it also includes grouped and multiple dwellings as well. There's no minimum lot area requirement now, so that can go on any size lot that can fit them. And the internal floor area still remains at 70 square metres. And this is really just to increase housing diversity and affordability, and hopefully get a better uptake of ancillary dwellings in medium density. So element 2.9, small dwellings, relates to element 5.5.1, single bedroom dwellings in part B. In part C, we're calling them small dwellings because there is no longer a limit on the number of bedrooms. However, the maximum floor area is still 70 square metres for single and group dwellings, with a maximum floor area of 60 square metres for multiple dwellings. And really, again, that's just to increase housing diversity and affordability. Part C, section 3 is neighbourliness. So element 3.1 site cover, with a related 2021 provision being element 5.1.4 open space. So there's now a new maximum site cover requirements for each R codes. Site cover is now measured to the site and not the parent lot, so common property is excluded. There's a definition of site cover now, and that includes any building and roof structure, including patios and carports and unenclosed areas. And this is really just to clarify that anything that covers the site with an impermeable surface is included in the site cover. So the intent of the changes are to replace the open space provisions of the R codes 2021. It really, site cover is used to limit the extent of site cover on the site, and really to improve daylighting and natural ventilation to the dwelling. It also works hand in hand with the primary garden area, and to provide space for gardens and trees. So element 3.2 is building height. So building height is measured both in stories and metres, and this aligns more closely with the way that volume 2 building height is measured. there are maximum wall and building heights that are relative to the roof type. So concealed and skilling roofs have total building height, and then a gabled and pitched and hip roofs have a higher building height there. So there are 3 stories are permitted within R50. So R40 developments have a 2-story building height limit in the deemed to comply, and then 3 stories permitted from up within R50. And this is really just to try to establish a residential character. So a more urban residential character in R50 and a more suburban residential character in R40 development. And also because R40 has been used a lot in Perth in blanket coding, and there'd be an impact on 3-story development potentially next to single-story infill development in that context. So the intent of the changes here are to provide flexibility for roof typologies and allow for greater flexibility for varying roof typologies, and it really encourages more generous floor to ceiling heights. So you might be getting lofts or mezzanines, and to encourage improved internal amenity. So element 3.4, so setbacks have really been simplified to relative to wall height and stories, so they're no longer related to major or whether they have a major or minor opening. So single-story boundary walls are permitted in R40 and below coded areas, and 2-story boundary walls are permitted in R50 plus coded areas, and really that's to try to establish that urban residential character and hopefully get to see more terrace typologies. However, there are limits to the length of those 2-story walls. There's a 14 metre limit. Really that's through some of the industry testing that we undertook, we know that terraces do fit within that 14 metre to length, so it's really just to allow for terraces to occur. If you look at the diagram on the right hand side, you can see that boundary walls are permitted to more than one lot boundary now, so depending on the coding, you are permitted up to 3 boundary walls onto 3 boundaries. And really the intent of those changes are to ensure more space is available for garden areas, so really put the energy back into those primary garden areas, again, support terrace typologies, and in greenfield development, reduce the need for local development plans, allowing for terraces to occur within the deemed to comply settings of the R codes. So element 3.6 is now streetscape, and that relates to element 5.2.2 garage width in the previous R codes. So the garage width provisions, they actually remain unchanged from the R codes 2021. So where you have a single-story development, the garage door is permitted to take up 50% of the frontage width, and where you have a double-story development, the garage door is permitted to take up to 60% of the frontage width. Element 3.10 is visual privacy. So visual privacy has actually changed quite a bit from the previous version of the R codes. So the cone of vision is now permitted to extend beyond the lot boundary. So it's trying to be more context specific around what an occupant may or may not be able to see from a development. So if the cone of vision overlooks a major opening or active habitable space, then there are settings within their deemed to comply settings that help to limit the line of sight within that cone of vision. However, if they're just overlooking the front setback or overlooking a roof or a garage, then you wouldn't need to limit that line of sight. The cone of vision where it is adjoining a vacant lot, however, would need to come to the property boundary or have other solutions that limit it to the property boundary, similar to the previous version of the R codes. So there are, as I mentioned, there are design solutions within the deemed to comply. So we've provided some examples within those provisions, such as fins and plant boxes that limit that line of sight. So really the intent of the changes here are to allow the cone of vision to more accurately reflect the point of conflict on the neighbouring site. And really we're trying to aim to reduce the need for highlight windows and screening. That was something that we really saw in those so the problem definitions, that's something we're really trying to see a change in this version of the code. Part D, I'll pass over to Matthew, who's going to cover Part D, land.
So Part D is land. So as Jenna mentioned, Table 1 of the current R codes, the site area controls are separated out into this section with other built form provisions throughout Part B, low density and then Part C, medium density, were related. So some key changes here. There's some new site area concessions. So there's a 35% site area concessions as opposed to 1/3. And they're for gold level accessible dwellings and small dwellings. So the key change here is that there's no minimum number of dwellings, and there's no occupancy restrictions. So no occupancy restrictions specific to those gold level accessible dwellings. And as Jenna mentioned, for universal design, it's really about encouraging this product out into the market. So there's different settings for R30 to 40 and then for R50 plus. And this is a clear distinction between your suburban and your urban character, your suburban and urban areas and being lesser or more serviced. So a greater uptake in density in your R50 plus is potentially more appropriate. And multiple dwellings are now measured in site area rather than plot ratio. And there's some guidance in Planning Bulletin 113 with some slight changes there in that sense. So what is unchanged is the site area concessions for age or dependent persons dwellings and single bedroom dwellings. So they are, as you previously noted, they still apply from R25 and below. There's a new site area concession for retaining a significant existing tree, as Blair alluded to. It's a 10% site area reduction for multiple dwellings only. So it's only when you're proposing a multiple dwelling. And this will be considered through a development application process. This site area concession would apply to any dwelling that doesn't already have a site area concession applied to it. And as noted, there is a change there with site area from previously being plot ratio, and Planning Bulletin 113 has been amended to suit that. With respect to local planning frameworks, we think there's a reduced need for modifications. The policy responds to a lot of components that are dealt with through local development plans and local planning policies. And with a whole range of new provisions, there is some more WPC oversight for when those modifications are being sought. So new provisions not previously dealt with that we've discussed in this presentation. There's a highlighted importance of pre-lodgement, which the WPC will engage in. We encourage local government to engage in it when commission approval is not required for a local planning framework modification. We'll also be releasing assessment templates. So we will be using internally an assessment template. It will be available on the website for considering modifications to the R codes via a local planning policy and also to a local development plan. So 2 assessment templates. We will be using those, and we encourage the use of them for local governments as well, again, where commission approval may not be required. Related to reform and the R codes, for reform, we'll be delivering a local development plan and a local planning policy manner and form, and that's a project that we will be involved in internally, assisting their delivery. There's new criteria for considering modifications to the R codes. So on the left there, you can see the criteria for the modifications to the R codes 2021. You see the 2 new components there. The key tie to SPP 7, the overarching state planning policy, that is on built environment in connection to it, and then also consistent with orderly and proper planning. With the transitional arrangements, there's 2 key components that we were looking for. So we need to facilitate the sold but not yet commenced house and land packages, and they're tied to lot size and the current R codes, and generally where those R codes are modified through a local development plan, where there would be issues with the new policy triggering development approvals. So facilitating the delivery of that product without introducing any red tape. And also facilitating local governments to review their local planning frameworks to align with the new R codes. So with the transitional arrangements, the Planning Bulletin 114 provides clear guidance on what applies when during the deferred gazette and the special transition period. We recommend that you read this if you're a local government officer, if you're a consultant or anyone dealing with navigating the transitional arrangements, the deferred gazettal period even that we're in now, whether it be related to a structure plan, a scheme, a local development plan, a development application, and the like. So we'll discuss that now. So here we are in the policy transition stage. We're in the deferred gazettal period, 6 months. So the gazettal date is the 1st September 2023. As of that date, the R Codes 2023 medium density provisions will apply to your typical infill. And then your special transition period commences for those single house lots in your greenfield area. So subject to, it could be in a brownfield site as well, subject to a local development plan and or a structure plan. And then that'll be the time when these local governments will be reviewing their local planning policy suite that relate to the R Codes, and then rescinding the local planning policies incorporating R&D codes. As of the 1st September 2025, the R Codes will apply to those lots. So for your development applications and your exempt development proposals in your deferred gazettal period, the R Codes 2021 do apply. So where you're considering the deemed to comply, that's where it ends. If there is a consideration of a design principle pathway and there's discretion that applies, there will be dual assessment scenarios to consider, and these will be subject to your determination timeframes. So if you're in that scenario, have a read of those sections of the planning bulletin, and they provide clear guidance. Otherwise, you can always contact the department. The local planning policies that modify the R Codes, so the 2021 R Codes, they will cease to have effect, or they'll at the end of the special transition period. So the R Codes 2023 will prevail over those. So we're recommending that local governments review the relevant LPPs to align with the new R Codes, and we've suggested to them that they consider prioritising those LPPs requiring Commission approval. And as noted, they'll be rescinding the LPPs incorporating the R&D codes. So if you're considering a local planning policy currently, or it's in active preparation, firstly, consider the impacts with medium density. Is it necessary? Is medium density dealing with something that you're trying to achieve through that local planning policy? And if you satisfy that question, try and align it in a sense so that it can be legible and be implemented consistent with the provisions of the R Codes. So local development plans, they are valid until expiry. So they will present some implementation issues if they have already been approved and then continue on past the end of the special transition period. So local governments will be considering a review of those LDPs to deal with that issue. Now, if you're considering a local development plan currently, it's recommended in the planning bulletin that the validity period aligns with the end of the special transition period. Otherwise, you could tailor the LDP to suit the provisions of the medium density, so that it can have a more appropriate life in terms of the 10 years maximum that you can support in the deemed provisions. With structure plans, the structure plans that modify the deemed to comply will expire in 2025, and that's as per the 2015 regs that were introduced. Structure plans no longer modify the deemed to comply, so that's quite a fortuitous time frame that's lined up quite nicely. And if you're considering a structure plan currently or an extension to a structure plan, should still consider the capacity of the subdivision stages to facilitate development to achieve the medium density codes. For local planning schemes, local governments are encouraged to review scheme provisions that reference the old R Codes or modify the old R Codes, with a view to align with the new R Codes, so 2023. This could be done as an omnibus amendment. We know these, regularly occur at local government, regularly in a planning sense. Otherwise, it can be done at the next scheme review. So for us, we'll still be here to provide advice on the R codes, any local planning frameworks, modifying the R codes, and navigating the special transition arrangements, or just even the deferred gazette we're in now. So feel free to email us at the email there, designwa@dplh. Otherwise, call through our front desk and ask for us in the design and built environment team. But for now, I encourage you to read the planning bulletin if you are navigating the transitional arrangements, and have a look at all the information on the medium density housing code website. And again, just real importance on the explanatory guidelines. This is something that you should really use, whether you're considering the new R codes deemed to comply, a design principle pathway, a local planning framework. It's really important in that sense. So that's everything from us. We do have future sessions coming up. You may have been to one, or you may be seeking further information on the medium density codes. So again, feel free to reach out to us if you have any queries.